This podcast explores how the music industry has evolved over time and makes predictions for how it may further develop in the future and what potential risks or welfare artists may be exposed to as it develops. Music consumption. In 1811, the first form of music storage was created, the music box. It was a primitive form of playing pre-written music. However, this method didn't allow the music to be actually recorded and played. Instead, it consisted of cutting small holes out of a metal disc that would play a certain note, or alternatively a cylinder with small metal protrusions that would play a note on a metal comb where each tooth of the comb was a different length and thus plays a different note. Years later, in 1888, the concept of the music box was significantly improved with the development of the wax cylinder. With the wax cylinder, recording and playing audio were finally possible. The process of recording consisted of turning a handle which rotated the wax cylinder, a stylus connected to a sound box, then pressed into the wax. The sound box absorbed vibrations in its environment, which then travel through the stylus and leave an imprint on the wax, which represents the vibrations absorbed by the sound box. These cylinders were then either handed and or coated with cotton to preserve the imprints for a longer time. This meant that the wax cylinder could then be played in a phonograph. The wax cylinder could then be turned with the stylus that follows the groove previously imprinted. The stylus then vibrated along the imprints, which are then acoustically amplified through the horn of the phonograph. Fast forward into the 20th century, vinyl record was invented, launched as early as 1930 and later becoming standardized around 1948. Vinyl records were a new, high-quality form of media storage that would be seen in homes, businesses, and events across the nations. Vinyl records work on a similar basis as wax cylinders, except instead of wax, PVC is used, which improves the strength of the record and the longevity of the recordings. This made it much more easy for people to actually buy records and listen to music at home. That switch was game-changing for the music industry. People were now able to properly listen to music at home and feel that music, which produced revenue for musicians left, right, and center. They also introduced the ability to record music in analog stereo, which is when you have two channels, left and right. The vinyl records were such an important invention in the music industry because, like I said, you could listen to music at home. Whilst the wax cylinder accomplished this to an extent, it never reached the level of quality seen in vinyl records and was much more difficult to store. Wax cylinders are cylindrical. They have a hollow part inside them which cannot be used. They can't be stacked with other wax cylinders and can't be played. Whereas vinyl records can be stood up in a line with each other with the music imprinted on both sides of the material. Vinyl records also opened up the music industry to graphical arts. Record sleeves and cases became commonplace, plastered with different personalities, pictures and paintings that reflected the music it contained. This was a huge change for the industry. There was now a demand for music at home. This massively changed how artists approached music. More time was being dedicated to recording music rather than just playing it live. This meant new studios were being built, new recording equipment was made and manufactured, more record labels were established, and artists found a new income. Vinyl record popularity skyrocketed in the 1950s and continued to increase until the mid-1970s, when the new cassette tapes grew in popularity. The cassette tape invention was first seen in the 1960s but became popular in the 1970s. A flat, rectangular body containing a magnetic tape would be played in a cassette tape player so that a user could listen to the music. They stored an analog stereo signal of similar quality to vinyl records, and they recorded this signal by changing the magnetism of the magnetic tape inside the cassettes in accordance with the music. A stronger magnetism meant a louder sound. This tape is stored on two spools inside of the cassette, which are spun to pass the tape over a reader in the tape player. The reader then reads the magnetism of the tape and amplifies it into a speaker so the tape can be heard as music. A monumental part of the cassette tape success was the Sony Walkman, released in 1979.
The incredible sounding Super Walkman.
Cassette tapes are also the first invention that allowed people to listen to music in their car without a radio signal. You could choose what you want to listen to. Some cars actually had vinyl players in, but the engineering behind that was ridiculously complicated. If anything happens to a record player when it's playing, a bump or a hit or a drop, it stops the record and In most cases, the needle could scratch the record, it will skip songs, it just doesn't really work. But cassette tapes were versatile, they were robust. You could knock them, you could drop them, and they probably still end up working, so they were brilliant for cars. Many cars that are being driven on the roads today still have cassette tape players inside them. The Sony Walkman is another example of how the versatility and robustness of tapes was used. The Walkman was a compact player you could clip onto your belt, plug some headphones in, and walk around listening to music. This was effectively the first MP3 player. You could walk around and listen to music anywhere you wanted. Younger generations may recognize this tape player from the superhero character Star-Lord from Marvel. Not long after the Walkman was released, CDs were invented, again in 1979, and were commercially released in 1982. CDs instantly overtook tapes and records in popularity, again another huge development in the music industry and how music was consumed. A CD has a reflective layer, and in its center, a single spiral track runs from the center of the CD to the circumference. If laid out on a straight line, this track would be 0.5 microns wide and 3.5 kilometers long. Over this track, pits and lands are found. These reflect light differently. A laser in the CD player tracks this spiral as the CD is spun and reads these pits and lands. The laser can tell if it's a pit or a land due to its change in light reflection. A change from a pit to a land is a binary 1. Consecutive pits or lands is a 0. This binary is then decoded to produce an analog audio signal sent to a listening device, whether it's speakers or headphones. Now, CDs weren't as versatile as tapes in terms of their robustness. CDs could be very easily scratched, but also they could jump. You couldn't walk around with a CD player, it would probably skip. The reason CDs were so game-changing for the music industry was that they could store up to 2 gigabytes more data than tapes and took up less space. CDs then became the standard for music storage and listening, and even today, CDs can be seen everywhere. They don't show as much artwork as records do, but they still had a lovely album cover on the front and artwork all throughout the CD, often with a little booklet in there with different photos from live performances or artwork produced by the musicians. Now, this was brilliant because even though the consumer is only necessarily buying the CD for the music, it gave way for other artists, painters, drawers, photographers to include their artwork in this already beautiful art piece. Following this, in the early 2000s, music consumption changed forever. File sharing and streaming became a thing. Napster was pretty much the first streaming service released in 1999. Napster allowed users to share files to each other over the internet. This immediately became a ground to share music files. Files containing music were being shared for free. Where previously consumers would have to buy a CD or buy a tape or a vinyl to listen to the music, this was being sent out for free. Artists weren't receiving the income they were before, so this is the first look at properly how the development in technology affected the income of musicians in a negative way. Not long after Napster's popularity skyrocketed, early services like Pandora and Last.fm became popular. Last.fm was a basic user interface first seen on computers running Windows XP back in the early 2000s with options to stream different artists. Touching back on how this affected musicians, big names in the music industry that already had millions and millions knew how wrong this was for younger artists trying to make a living. People such as Lars Ulrich stood up against services like Napster, both verbally and legally. Massive court cases were made over how music was being pirated and given away for free and how wrong this was. In the early 2010s, a new service called Spotify began to rise in popularity. Spotify is now among one of the leading forms of consumption of music. Similar services include iTunes, Deezer, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music, all pretty much doing the same thing as Spotify, and began streaming mass amounts of music to the public. This changed the industry. CDs, records, tapes, album artwork, CD artwork, tape artwork, or record players were no longer in such high demand. This took away jobs. Engineers and factories building these devices artists making the artwork for all these consumptions of music were no longer as needed. This is one of the many negatives of the modern music environment. Some people would also argue that modern streaming services have ruined how people listen to music. Most people would say that listening to an album in its order from start to end is the true way to listen to music. That is how the artist intended for it to be listened to. Instead of listening by album, people pick and choose what songs they want to listen to. And yes, of course, you could skip tracks on a CD or move the needle across on a record, but it was so easy to do now that people were just making playlists left, right, and center. Of course, that's enjoyable for the consumer, but how do you think this affects the music for the artist? Is the music being listened to properly? Is there such a thing as listening to music properly, or should everyone be open to their own interpretation of said music? How to release music. Music can be released independently or through a record label. A record label or company is an organization that releases and distributes an artist's music, usually also assisting in the distribution of tickets for live events. Other roles, including a manager for an artist or band, will work closely with the record label and the artist to organize studio recording time, rehearsals, and live events. A record label may well be a major, well-established organization with a good reputation and a hefty sum of money at their disposal. Examples of these include Sony Music, Capitol Music Group, Columbia, Warner Music Group, Def Jam Recordings, EMI, Atlantic Records, Virgin Records, and Interscope, and many others. Record labels can also be more independent. Independent record labels may often have to cut corners due to a lack of funding, which can be seen as a negative, although they will also offer the artists more friendly contracts, allowing the artist to keep the rights to their own music. Big record labels, whilst they may offer you more benefits in terms of exposure and quality, they may not offer these friendly contracts. Music can also be released independently by an artist or band without the help of a record label. However, many artists will struggle to reach the masses without a label. Music can also be released independently by an artist or band without the help of a record label. However, many artists will struggle to reach the masses without a label. More on this later in the video. Finances. There is, of course, a cost associated with releasing music. In terms of recording and rehearsing, a project can be completed anywhere, even in your own home, which is, of course, the cheapest option. However, if an artist wants a more professional setting, rehearsal locations with rent from anywhere between £10 to £100 per hour can be found, often coming packed with their own stage, drum kit, amps, synthesizers, and PA. Many artists will use a combination of both types of rehearsal spaces, the cheaper, the free, and the more expensive, to save money where they can. Recordings can also be made anywhere. With the progression of technology, recording has become increasingly accessible. Many independent artists become successful just from using a computer and an audio interface at home, paired with a few microphones and an instrument or two. However, many artists opt for a more professional place to record their music. Studios are packed with equipment that independent artists would not be able to afford and would have to spend countless hours learning how to use. Studios rent themselves out, usually with a dedicated sound engineer or multiple engineers for larger studios that assist the artist in recording their music. Studios will rent anywhere between £300 and £3,000 a day on average. Studios will often allow the artist to hire instruments too, perhaps to increase the broadness of frequencies and taste and sound on their music. How about the costs of actually releasing music? Larger bands will hire people to publicize their music and distribute their media to the press. To send announcements to media outlets to garner press coverage can cost between £500 to £2,000, and hiring a professional to manage media relations and secure coverage can cost anywhere from £1,000 to £5,000 per month. Digital PR, Facebook, Instagram, X, previously known as Twitter. These are all platforms that the band can manage independently if they're a smaller band and choose to do that. However, people again can be hired to do this from anywhere between £500 and £5,000. Some bands start influencer partnerships, where a social media influencer is paid by the band to use, listen, and spread awareness of their music to their followers, which again is around £500 to £5,000 per collaboration. Another way to spread your music is on radio and TV, which is still in many ways the forefront of new music and how music is heard by the masses. Radio pluggers are people that promote your music to radio stations and DJs, and this can cost anywhere from £1,000 to £5,000 a month. Some bands can get lucky and get their stuff released on radios for free. Often radio stations such as BBC One will gets newer artists who have taken off to host a DJ show where they play their favorite younger, smaller, more independent artists to try and spread awareness. And that's free. But then again, sometimes larger bands want to get their music heard in specific places and to more stations, and this is where a radio plugger comes in. TV plugger services are very similar to radio pluggers, but for TV, which again cost anywhere from £1,000 to £5,000 per month. To this day, music videos are still a great way to spread awareness. Even to this day, music videos are still a great way to spread knowledge of someone releasing music. Pairing music with cool videos and cool ideas can ingrain it in someone's memory and get people talking. Music video production can be independent and simple and recorded at home, or it can be done in a fully fledged film studio. This can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 or more, depending on what quality and complexity the artist chooses to use. Another way of releasing music is to play it live. The live shows need advertisement. Bands and artists need to have an audience. Promotions for these live tours can cost anywhere from £1,000 to £10,000 or more. Getting your live shows on media, on TV, on radio. Booking agents and tour managers manage the tour and make sure that it can happen well. Find the right dates, find the right people, find the right companies for lighting, for sound. This on a whole can expect to take about 10 to 20% of the profits from a tour. Tour merchandise is another brilliant way for artists to spread awareness about themselves. Merchandise is loved by fans globally and is essentially its own form of advertisement. Costs on merchandise completely depend on the quantities and the quality of the merchandise. Getting it designed, getting it printed, getting it shipped, all add to the cost. This can be anywhere from £50 for a few t-shirts, £500 for a few hoodies, or £5,000 or more. An artist expects to generate some sort of revenue from these events, whether it's performing live or streaming their music on Spotify or iTunes. But all of these forms of revenue also have an upfront cost associated with them. For live events, the revenue is simply the ticket and the merchandise sales, but the cost of the venue depend on the actual venue itself, the equipment used, the session musicians used, and the average cost of this depends completely on those factors, but can be from $5,000 to $100,000 on average. Publishing your music also generates a revenue from royalties and licensing fees, whether it's from a radio station or from a digital streaming service. But in order to stream your music safely, it must be copyrighted legally, and these have fees anywhere from £200 to £500 per copyright registration. Returning back to digital music consumption, such as Spotify, Deezer, YouTube Music, iTunes, artists receive a micropayment per stream, which often is argued is too little. It's so easy to listen to music on Spotify, and fractions of a penny are earned per stream on Spotify and iTunes. Labels releasing this music to Spotify often cut around 20 to 50% per stream. This leaves the artist with little money left after, especially affecting those smaller artists. Music can also be used in films, TV shows, commercials, and video games. This has a cost associated with it in order to get your music licensed and copyrighted for that specific use, although this can also have a massive revenue where your music is being associated with other art that already has popularity. You can gain thousands of listeners from this, millions. Another interesting area for copyright is sampling or recovering versions of music. In order to cover a song or take samples from a song and release it as your own song, particular licensing and royalty will be needed for that in order for the original artist to also gain some of the profits, seen as they did write the original song. Moving on to sectors of employment in the music industry. For this section, I've chosen 4 roles that specifically interest me, roles that I may take up at some point in my life. The first role I've chosen is a music engineer. Music engineers produce live music or recordings of live and studio performances. To do this, they use a vast array of techniques and technologies, including EQ, dynamics processing, audio effects, mixing, compression, automation, and many, many more. Using these techniques requires a strong knowledge of the inner workings of audio mixers, the physics of music, and the numerous technologies used to produce audio. Music engineers also work with the physical layout of a recording space or stage. For example, an awareness of the kit being used for a studio or live recording is fundamental for music engineers. For example, Microphones need to be selected very carefully in accordance with what instrument they're recording. Vocal mics have a particular pattern in what audio they pick up. They want to pick up as much vocal as possible whilst blocking out as much of the band and the audience as possible. And the placement of these microphones is also fundamental. Of course, all this can be edited in post. We're using different digital audio workspaces such as Ableton Live or Logic, but a good engineer would always make sure that the signal sounds as good as possible when it's dry and hasn't been affected by any post-processing. Now, the positives of becoming a music engineer. Becoming a music engineer gives you great technical expertise, specializing in knowledge of how to record, mix and master audio, and they'll have great attention to detail, keeping a keen ear for the sound quality and can fine-tune recordings to achieve the optimal clarity and balance. However, one of the downsides of becoming a music engineer, say I were to become a music engineer now, it is very likely that I'd be very limited by my equipment. Dependency on high quality recording equipment may restrict flexibility and creativity. I may not be able to produce a sound that I want to create because I don't have the right equipment for it. A good engineer, however, should be able to create the sound they need with the kit they have. Many would argue that the less kit used, the better. Being a music engineer also opens up opportunities for the creation of new technology. Technological advancements in music engineering can lead to other advancements in different careers, and having that ability to innovate and create new sounds, new equipment is a great skill for anyone to have. However, being a music engineer does have its threats associated with it. In the music industry, there is high competition to be at the top of the pedestal and have your music listened by most people, or as a music engineer, mix for the best artists. Many would argue that the most important part of being a good music engineer is to mix the best bands and the best artists. This high competition may limit job opportunities and potential income. The economy of the music industry is also very volatile and can shift up or down at a moment's notice, which again can affect the income of a music engineer. The second role I selected as a potential role that I may take up in the future and interest me personally is a lighting technician. This may sound different from music up front, but a lighting technician would work closely with musicians to enhance the performance of a musician live on stage. Pretty much every concert these days has more than just a few lights on the stage. The lights reflect the music and immerse the audience more and more into the music. Is more of a reason for more people to buy tickets, but also just makes the music feel better. Truly emphasizes that feeling you get when you listen to a good song. Lighting technicians truly play a crucial role in the music industry. Their creativity and ability to adapt to diverse environments make them essential contributors to delivering and captivating memorable experiences for the audience, which they will remember, tell their friends, tell their family, and produce more and more income for the band. Similarly to music engineer, the strength of being a lighting engineer is that you learn these great technical expertise and truly understand how different forms of art can come together. And to be a good light engineer, you have to have great creativity. Lighting is an art. Lighting changes how everything looks, literally. However, being a lighting engineer can be very, very physically demanding. Working closely with people that climb up trussing to rig lighting, or perhaps even rigging the lighting yourself, can lead to fatigue and injuries. And many good lighting displays in the modern industry require brilliant, expensive, and advanced technology. And this would limit smaller, more independent lighting technicians to a lesser creativity and perhaps diminishing their ideas. Again, lighting technicians have the opportunity to incorporate innovative lighting techniques into the performances and advance that technology and truly show off their creativity. And having such a good understanding of the tech side of music and combining the lights with the audio and having such a good idea of how audio and visual come together to become an audio-visual production can lead to brilliant other careers. However, again, the market in the music industry is very, very volatile, so becoming a lighting engineer can lead to an uncertain income. However, lighting technicians will often be hired by other companies that can switch performers and go to different venues, different stages, different artists. So a lighting technician may experience less of a hit from market volatility compared to, say, a musician or a music engineer. The third role that I've picked is simply a musician. A musician is simply someone who plays an instrument. This may be a guitar, a piano, or their own voice. Musicians are usually capable of playing multiple instruments and are brilliant music writers themselves. A musician may be an artist in their own right and perform for themselves, Musicians may also resume the role of a session musician. Session musicians are musicians that are hired by other artists, managers, or tour managers. For example, artists like Taylor Swift or Olivia Rodrigo don't have their own bands with them, as they are solo artists, but when performing on stage, they'd want to have a guitarist, a bassist, a drummer on stage. So they hire session musicians to play with them live on stage. Session musicians will also work closely with artists on album recording. Many instruments heard on albums will not be played by the artist, but instead played by the session musician. Session musicians can also help to write the music for an artist. If the artist wants a certain bass line but can't figure it out themselves, they may hire a session musician to help do that work for them. Many artists that you hear perform live and hear their music on Spotify, many of them may have the same person playing a certain instrument on their albums. A popular session musician known as Dan Jaycaster has toured with bands to the like of Muse, Stereophonics, and Bring Me the Horizon, and has played instruments on many of their albums. Musicians, whether it's a session musician or a solo musician or band, are so very talented and skillful. They possess musical talent and proficiency in playing instruments or singing, allowing them to create captivating performances and truly expressing their creativity. However, being a musician, particularly an artist, has its weaknesses and threats associated with it. Session musicians aren't as vulnerable to market volatility or the need to become famous because they are simply hired out by artists. But being your own artist in of yourself or band, you are exposed to the financial instability of uncertain gigs, fluctuating album sales, fluctuating interest from the audience, whether it's purchasing gig tickets or streams on Spotify. Many solo artists or bands that are musicians will also have to self-promote. Self-promoting is a massive risk because if you don't reach an audience big enough to cover your income, you may not generate enough money to sustain your job as a musician. Again, session musicians don't experience this issue as much as artists do because they, again, can just be hired out by artists that are already successful and a guaranteed listening audience. Touching back on the threats, the music industry has high competition, as mentioned previously in the music engineer section. Musicians will experience a massive threat from this competition. If they aren't releasing the best music possible, then it's very likely that someone else is releasing music arguably better than theirs. And if another artist is doing that, that means less audience and less revenue for that musician. Being a musician is great. It lets you be creative and properly enjoy your job. Although with all these weaknesses and threats, it's so hard to become a good and successful musician that many would argue that it's too risky of a job to take up. A slightly less risky role in the music industry is the fourth role that I've chosen, a luthier. Now, a luthier is a skilled craftsman who specializes in the construction and repair and restoration of stringed instruments, whether it's a guitar, a violin, a viola, a cello, a double bass, or a bass guitar. Their role in the music industry is essential, often working behind the shadows and not as known to the public. They ensure the quality and playability and sound of instruments are at their best. Luthiers meticulously build instruments from scratch, selecting different woods, shaping and assembling components to achieve the optimal tone and resonance. They also provide maintenance and repair services, addressing issues such as cracks, warping, or damaged components. This is especially important for touring musicians as they need some form of guitar tech or luthier to ensure that their instruments are playable for every gig. Imagine being an artist performing live and you have no playable instruments. You could go and buy a new guitar from a local guitar shop, but there's no guarantee that it would work the way you want it to. Luthiers will often work closely with larger artists to ensure that instruments are to their spec. Luthiers also play a vital role in preserving the heritage of stringed instruments and how they've changed over history, often contributing to the artistry and performance of musicians worldwide. The strengths of being a luthier is it gives you these brilliant craftsmanship skills that could be used in many other careers, such as a carpenter, a builder, a painter. Luthiers can also express their creativity through making stringed instruments. Great customization and innovation in instruments allows these luthiers to change and develop their instruments, creating new sounds, new shapes, new looks, which can all be very appealing to different consumers. However, being a luthier is a very time-intensive process. Crafting an instrument can take months, years, and designing them can take even longer. Luthiers are also quite a niche profession. Not many of them exist compared to artists or audio engineers. Luthiers are threatened by larger corporations that use machinery or dozens of workers to produce instruments, where the nicheness of a small independent luthier is not as necessary. Mass production is a massive risk for luthiers, where mass manufacturers can often offer a lower price, which again threatens the luthier. And again, the music industry is a very, very volatile economy, which can impact the income of a luthier, especially smaller luthiers that work on a more order-to-order basis rather than mass-produced instruments. All four of these roles inspire me as a musician and someone that wants to be involved in the music industry. To be on stage and perform with your friends or your friends in the audience watching you is such a wonderful dream, and to be able to share your creativity to the rest of the world and spread your feelings to people who may feel the same way. It's such an intriguing idea. Or mixing those shows, managing them with an audio engineer role or a lighting technician, being able to combine visual art with audible art is such an appealing job. And the same applies to a luthier. Only time will tell which one I end up picking, as all four of these are very, very appealing. And as for most people, the role I end up picking will depend on the opportunities I'm faced with. All of these roles depend heavily on what you can do as an individual right now. Some people have much better opportunities than others. Being taught how to play an instrument as a child may give people much more intuitivity in playing an instrument. Those that don't have that may struggle to be a musician. A lesser understanding of math and engineering will cause people to struggle to be a lighting engineer or a music engineer. On to the final section, the future of the music industry. As previously mentioned in section 1, digital music is ever evolving and is still quite a new addition to the music industry. Considering how much the music industry has changed because of digital music, how much more will it change? There's a chance that revenue for smaller artists will keep on going down and down and down, and may eventually cease to a point where smaller artists can't earn enough money to sustain their creativity and aren't able to release music anymore. On the other hand, this revenue could also increase as new laws and new rules and new ways of digitally releasing music become a common practice. Many people are also seeing the return of vinyl, one of the oldest consumption methods of music. Does this mean that more traditional music consumption formats such as CDs or tapes or even wax cylinders will return? Whilst it's unlikely that wax cylinders will return as a consumption of music, vinyl's returning paves the way for jobs that were previously disregarded as Spotify and iTunes came out, such as album artwork designers or photographers. Vinyl's returning paves the way for them to rediscover the love for their job and perhaps earn an even greater income. Large bands and artists who previously wouldn't consider releasing their music on vinyl now release it on vinyl, which is game-changing, bringing back jobs that were perhaps dying as Spotify, iTunes, Deezer, YouTube Music and other digital consumption formats of music came out. If the increasing consumption of music through vinyl continues to increase, artists may very well expect to see an increase in revenue, which in a growing world with more and more younger musicians fighting for the spotlight, may allow for more and more music to be heard and more artists to become successful. Social media and digital music also gives smaller artists access to a much wider audience that they would not be able to achieve with any older technologies. This helps them find the people that feel their music best quicker, which means they can expect to see some sort of revenue and definitely some sort of interest much sooner. Paired with all these benefits though is the worry that even though vinyls are taking off, Spotify, Deezer, iTunes may end up taking over, where the sales in actual physical albums will decrease and music revenue will be completely based on those micropayments from digital streaming services, which are still today argued to be way too small for an artist to live off of. These days, it's also harder to have privacy and proper copyright on your music. It's so easy to pirate and just share music with your friends for free, and for the artist to not make money off of that. Digital music, as a major factor in the future of music, has its own benefits and downsides associated with it. In the end, only time will tell which direction this chooses to take. Maybe it'll be a fairly even path where the benefits are matched with the downsides, or maybe a massive decrease in the revenue for artists worldwide will be seen and music will begin to die, or maybe all those smaller artists will be able to release more and more of their music and more new sounds will be heard worldwide. Thanks to social media, A&R companies can now find talented musicians much easier. Scouts can search through different platforms, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, to find musicians that they want to hire for record labels or promote in order to gain their own revenue and producer revenue for the artist. However, many would argue that this takes away the essence and the feel of being in a room with a musician. Previously, A&R scouts would go to live gigs to listen to music and seek out potential musicians for their contracts. Now that more and more of that is being done online, that feel is being missed. On the contrary, another benefit of social media is unsigned artists now have a platform to release music to in order to spread their sound and grow an audience, something that would not have been possible a few years ago. This innovation in social media and technology is making it easier and easier for individual artists to record their music and release it, with less and less equipment being needed. Moving on to what is probably seen as the greatest threat for modern musicians, AI. AI does present itself as a threat. It may remove the need for someone to actually write songs, come up with riffs, come up with lyrics. However, many would argue that AI cannot create the feel of a song written by a human. Think of it this way, anyone can sing a set of lyrics. If someone is singing some lyrics that they wrote about how they feel, they will truly embrace those lyrics. No matter how good of a singer they are, a good performer will truly embrace those lyrics, and you'll know it. And because they feel those lyrics that they are singing, it is very likely that you, the audience, will also feel that and feel that connection to them. It's unlikely that such a thing will be possible through AI. But what do you think? Can a song purely written by an AI truly encapsulate the feelings of that song the same way a human can? Another question asked regarding the future of music. Do modern artists need a record label? Whilst a record label gives these great benefits to an artist, managing production costs, spreading awareness of the artist and booking venues, the contracts for an artist to have with a record label can seem so restrictive and invasive for the artist, often taking away rights to their song. Do the positives outweigh the negatives? Or would an artist be better off releasing the music on their own? Again, with technology advancing so much, it may in fact be easier and more rewarding for an artist to release music on their own. Returning to the subject of AI and relating that back to the roles that I picked that I most enjoy the idea of becoming in the music industry, any of the roles I mentioned previously interest me. Although all of them may very well be threatened by AI, engineers could have their jobs taken over by AI with automatic desks, automatic mixing, automatic compressors. Musicians could have AI write songs instead, but people value people and work. Without having a goal to create something and that amazing feeling you get when you do complete something, there is not much point to human existence. Having something to get you out of bed, having something to create and finish and feel is the point of life in many people's opinions. So personally, I do not believe that AI will actually take over. Much like other things, it's a tool. A hammer can be used to build sustainable housing or used to destroy it. How AI affects the music industry depends on how humans choose to use it. It is likely it will become another tool under a musician's sleeve to help them get through writing blocks, shorten research time, to, on a whole, increase the time an artist can spend actually creating. Luthiers will continue to innovate and develop how instruments are made, taking inspiration from the past and combining it with their complex imaginations to create something new. Something new that will be used to create contemporary music, played by musicians, mixed by engineers, performed at huge venues, designed by engineers. Masses of people working in collaboration to create something bigger than themselves. Lighting engineers, audio engineers, logistics, event coordinators, musicians, the audience, everyone. This is the beauty of art and creation, something that cannot be taken away and will forever be developing into new forms inspired by the past, paving the way for the future.